Welcome back. I'm very excited for our next guest, Danny Kennedy. Welcome, Danny. How's it going?
Hello. Good. Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this in Australia. It's the time difference is significant, and I appreciate that you could make it work.
Really, really happy to be here or there or wherever we are. Yeah.
Wherever we are in the virtual world. Well, yeah. Danny, you're kind of an interesting person for this audience, and I asked you to be here. You graciously accepted, and despite the fact that real estate isn't like your community, and I wanted you to be here a little bit to talk about what you've learned and experienced in another field that is very closely tied to the work that we're doing. And you now have a lot more involvement in the world of real estate innovation as it relates to the climate, because I think everyone needs that inspiration of how well it can work when an industry really takes off and pays attention to imperatives around climate change and pays attention to these ways that industry needs to
Right.
change. So I'm hoping you can start off by just giving us a bit of a background on your story so that folks know all of your incredible accomplishments, which I hope you will not be shy to tell them so we can set the stage.
Well, sure. And thank you so much for having me here. And it's really great to be talking to the audience of real estate professionals and technologists thinking about climate and sustainability. Very important thinking and doing work you're going to do in years to come. I come out of a lot of work around climate energy policy advocacy for decades, and more recently, since sort of 2007, was an entrepreneur in the renewable generation space. So I guess the industry you're talking about is that power business that has really been fully disrupted in the last 15 years, since about the time I got seriously involved rather than just sort of standing on the outside rallying for the cause. And I started a company which became, the time I left, the largest privately held rooftop business in the residential space in America. It's still Europe's largest residential business, called Sungevity. I've been involved in finance businesses in the rooftop residential space like Mosaic, and some solar as a service businesses in emerging countries like Kenya and Fiji and the South Pacific. And done well with it, but really just ridden a wave of disruption. There's no other word for it. The truth is, solar has changed electricity such that now The Economist is running stories on electrostates replacing petrostates in the geopolitics of the world. And that's because in the decade from 2010 to 2019, the last trailing decade, the largest set of new capacity on the world's grids was solar. You may not see that, but because coal was crashing through that decade and many coal plants retired or were shut down, and not that much actually was built, notwithstanding that which was built in Asia, the replacement and new additions of solar, it has been enormous, and wind also to some degree. And so we're now rising to the point where we're the dominant new energy source, and will soon be, like 2 decades out, the dominant energy source in the electricity system. So all to say, it can be done, been there, been part of it. It's an heroic story. We call it the solar coaster in my case, the ups and downs of startups and stuff. But the built environment, which is another great source of emissions in the climate, the wicked problem that is climate, needs to go through a similar disruption cycle. And I think it is. And that's what I guess we're here to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess maybe to start off with, let's talk about what you think, what you think you've learned from watching the power sector change that you think we should all start to expect to happen a little bit in real estate. What are the trends to check out, to look for, who leads, who follows, that kind of thing?
A couple of insights from the electricity business and now mobility, which I also work in with the current job at New Energy Nexus, where we invest in startups around the world. One is not to underestimate or misunderstand exponential curves. Things do not change in linear paths, they change on exponentials. And once you see an inflection starting to build, you should pay very close attention to it. So for example, materials in your building sector, what are they? What are they going to be in the future? Is this laminated timber thing really a thing? And when it doubles in a year from 1% to 2%, it may still seem really insignificant, just as solar did just 10 years ago when Bill Gates called it too small to make a difference. The truth is that 2% goes to 4, goes to 8, goes to 16, goes to 32, goes to 64, goes to over 100 in 7 doublings. So if it's a rate of doubling of every couple of years or something or other, be aware 7 years out, it's going to be the thing dominating that sector, that material supply chain, whatever that may be. So exponential is really key. And the other thought, just in response to your question, Lindsay, is watch China. Like, what are they doing? What's happening in the built environment there? Because what happened in the electricity sector there, and again, I know we get in the Western press a lot of negativity around coal, and that's fair because they still build and have too much of it in the system. But they also decided about 2006 to be serious about renewables, and then they got serious about renewables. And their 5-year plans, for the last 2 5-year plans, just cranked it out, said we will crank it out, and now they are the dominant manufacturer and deployer. I mean, in the solar space, they did a gigawatt of rooftop last month. I mean, it's like building a large coal plant, a 250, 300 megawatt coal plant in a month.
Insane.
And that's on roofs, not even ground mounted utility scale stuff. So what are they doing in the building space? They're building cities with urban design standards that would make our walkable, livable cities laughable. They're making, fantastic energy efficient phase change materials for flooring. I've seen this stuff in Chengdu and in Beijing and Shanghai. They're electrifying their entire vehicle fleets, which in turn completely transforms the city, what's doable and needed. So yeah, China will drive a lot of this, and if you're a professional in the space, you can't ignore it.
Yeah, that's a great one. And it is. I mean, I watch all the different things going on in China, and even just the ways in which they figured out how to construct buildings in much more efficient ways. Something that is it's pretty awe-inspiring. It's also one of the areas that cares a lot more about indoor environmental quality and air quality issues and filtration and monitoring and all those things that the US hasn't really started to care about until we started being on fire, and now now we care. So yeah, there's a lot there I think people can learn from China. I guess I want to also make sure we really call out the work that you're doing with Clean Energy Nexus on a broader, New Energy Nexus on a broader scale, because I think that's part of the context for your work. You see a ton of entrepreneurs and companies all over the world these days, right? Can you tell everybody a little bit about how you spend your time now?
Yeah, we are really the world's largest platform for incubators, accelerators, and funds supporting clean energy entrepreneurship. So we manage programs to support startups, we train them, we mentor them, we bring them resources, and we manage funds. Some are grant funds, like in California. Some are sort of debt facilities to support the companies to grow and deploy their technologies. Some are equity investing vehicles out of Singapore for Indonesia, obscure kind of broadly concessionary capital to try to juice markets that matter from a climate point of view. So we're particularly focused in Southeast Asia and in the future in Africa, because we think they're spaces that have huge emergent populations, big energy demands and growing massively as the young populations kind of aspire to greater economic means and deserve them, of course, but if they meet them with dirty energy supply, whether that be their electricity or mobility solutions, we've all got a problem. So we're trying to inoculate those economies with the clean energy technology, which good news is now cheaper, better, and can be built faster than any of the dirty stuff. So for most of these places, and when I say places, I'm talking about mega cities, really. Like the population of the world is urbanizing, as you all know. And it's now in Asia and Africa. By 2050, which is sort of the outside time frame of the energy transition that we must have on Earth to abate the worst of climate change, 80% of humans will be in the places we now call Asia and Africa, the countries. So only 20% will be left in the old world and in the Americas and Australia and all these places. So, and 50% of those 80% will be in cities. You know, cities you and I barely think about: Kinshasa, Kano, you know, Dhaka, Denpasar, you know, like Balikpapan. You know, that's going to be the capital of a country of 300 million people whose electricity demand is going to go from 1,000 kilowatt hours per annum per capita today to like 5,000 kilowatt hours per annum per capita soon. That's got to be done with clean electricity. So that's what we do. We support the startups that are going to serve them and deliver those better, cheaper, faster solutions, which is a wonderful privilege of a role. And I get to run around the world, or virtually do that these days, and visit with them and learn about them and all these amazing things they're doing, which are just many and wonderful.
Yeah. And then one of the cities that people might know a little bit more about that you also now have a presence in is New York City.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing there?
Absolutely, because it's very relevant, I think, to the crowd, which is that we launched a program this year, actually, 2020, called the Clean Fight. And Lindsay, thank you so much for your support with that too. But NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, has sponsored this program, which brings later stage startups or small companies in the energy efficiency space to the Empire State. And the idea is that we're bringing the best and brightest solutions for New York to meet its decarbonization goals. As you all probably know, many New York RE professionals listening to this, there are pretty radical goals and mandates by 2025 for both the city and state of New York to decarbonize the built environment. There's not a lot of industry with the cutting edge stuff. And so we put out a call to companies around the world to come in to New York. And to New York, and we've got a lot of great applicants from across the state as well as across the states and around the world. I think over 200 companies applied. We're currently shortlisting, so can't say much more about that. But the exciting thing is we've teamed up with a bunch of big corporates in New York, real estate industry, construction companies, finance businesses, all to bring to these startups all that they will need to succeed, as well as some money. We've got some money to put into them as well. But the point will be that 6 or 8 companies in this cohort will get the bells and whistles treatment so that they can quickly land and build a revenue base and employ New Yorkers in cleaning up the built environment. And we call that the Clean Fight, and would love you all to join. And please check it out, cleanfight.com, or talk to me or Lindsay afterwards, and we'll put you in touch with the team in New York.
Yeah. I thank you for promoting. I should say for full disclosure that I'm on the board, and I really believe in it. I think a lot of the folks watching today probably have real estate in New York, or they're based in New York, because commercial real estate is just so heavily influenced by Manhattan, and yet it's such a different place, New York, the way that the real estate works. So I've already spoken to a lot of entrepreneurs who are excited because, for those of you who have real estate in New York, you probably understand that sometimes an application makes sense in other places, but it doesn't really fit well in New York, especially in Manhattan. So part of the goal of the Clean Fight is to really make sure that works, make sure that new technologies that can help optimize buildings can work well in New York. And we've got a ton of great established companies in New York that are doing this, which I just think, you've experienced this, but it's the crossing the chasm moment for a lot of these companies that they really need to be able to scale. So we're hoping that happens in New York, and with the support of Clean Fight. And I guess I should also say, I don't know that we don't know what the themes will be in future years, but this is the year for the buildings focus of the Clean Fight, and it'll be different.
And look, I hope that never goes away, because the first fuel is energy efficiency. Like we forget that at our peril, and we have to stay focused on the built environment because it is such a big source of emissions. We have to fix it. and along the way we'll make it better and lower cost to operate and better for the inhabitants. It's all good. We'll also have to pile on and do some other programs as well in New York, but yeah, it's got to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually reminds me of something I wonder if you could talk about for a second, which is, you talked about how much solar has taken off and how renewable energy is really becoming cheaper than other fuels. I think there are some folks in real estate who think that they don't need to do anything because pretty soon all the electricity will be clean anyway. So why care about, efficiency? So I guess, what would you say to those people who are thinking like, oh, good news is our power sector friends have got it?
Oh yeah, don't believe that hype. I'm sorry if I made you feel like that just because I'm excited and have, ridden a wave that's been rising. It's not enough. We have two, maybe 3 decades to do something which is ahistoric, which is completely switch out the system of energy provision for humans on Earth, and we have to get off fossil fuels in that time frame and replace it. So everything we can do to make every demand center, every load tighter, more efficient is better, because that's less renewables needs to be applied. And we have to grow the renewables, and that's happening, but no, we shouldn't relent on every front that we can make advances, particularly when they're cost effective and they improve outcomes across the board. There's so many co-benefits to making these improvements. It's sort of wild that we don't do it already. But yeah, please push on all fronts, and let's never be complacent, because we've got like 30 years here, and some call this the decisive decade, the 2020s. I'm wary of putting a deadline on it, but the sooner we act, the better it is for 7 generations from now. Is how I think about it. This year is the coldest year you and I will ever experience. Is the way to think about it.
I know.
And
Yeah.
it's only going to get hotter, and every bit of carbon we stop from getting into the sky, the better, which means energy efficiency all the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a lot to say there. I've been pleased to start hearing that more real estate decision makers are thinking about climate risk and resilience in the management of their portfolios. It's all of a sudden a thing that everyone's doing, and it's scary, but I feel like this has become a year when that is no longer an option in real estate operation. So like,
Yeah.
I think that drives it home in many ways too. Okay, well, so a big part of this transition, a big part of what has happened with solar, for example, is about financing mechanisms. I know you're a fan of all of the different ways that this can be manipulated. So can you talk a little bit about just how financing plays such a part in it, and how anything that you see happening in real estate that you think is promising to make the transition go smoother?
Sure. I think people misunderstand that the challenge these days, we kind of know what we need to do. We need to deploy wind and solar at scale, and some other things, some batteries, some other energy storage technologies, some geothermal here and there. But we've got it. We have the formula. There used to be a debate: is it going to be nukes? Is it going to be coal with sequestration? Whatever. That's 20 years ago. The answer is clear. The lowest cost form of electricity is coming out of wind and solar, and we've got to scale that. But that's a capex intensive exercise. It's capital expense that is quite kind of full of sticker shock for a lot of people. Wow, those big wind turbines off the coast cost a lot to install, don't they? Yeah, but then they have no fuel and very little operating and maintenance costs. So over their life, they produce the lowest cost electricity you can imagine. True of solar panels as well on a roof. So financing the deployment, financing the capex is this critical piece of the work we need to do in the electricity sector. And I look to real estate professionals and real estate technology professionals, by which I don't just mean digitech type technology, but finance tech, to finance products and services, which the real estate industry has actually been, one of the groundbreaking sectors for. The mortgage, as an example, like talk about how do you bring forward a dream, you give every American their own home by a 30-year term debt product, which was a complete revolution when it was made. You know, it's a bit like people point out that, you know, Henry Ford, sure, he was smart developing the car and all, but because of his weird, well, I shouldn't say that, that sounds judgmental, because of his belief in certain principles, he didn't want to charge debt and didn't want to finance his cars off the production line, so he would only sell them for cash. GM comes along with GMAC and finances cars and creates the auto loan industry, and everyone's got a car. So it's those sorts of insights that we have to apply to this massive deployment of wind, solar is what I do, financing those things. New building technologies, better built environments. You know, they might look more expensive up top, you know, at the front of the 100-year life of the thing, but they're gonna perform better, have lower costs, no fuel inputs, whatever. So let's do them. And creating innovative financing products is as important as creating new innovations in technology, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, we're starting to see some of that. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, PACE, you know,
Great example.
we have PACE financing has come into commercial buildings. It's not been as successful. There's some issues with it. You know, obviously, energy service companies have been around for a long time, so it feels like we've started to get there. But I think one of the things I'm interested in seeing is those started as very big institutional kind of strategies to getting there. And I'm excited to see some more startups doing things that are really innovative in the financing realm.
Well,
and there are some, I guess they're out there.
Absolutely. We are going to run a finance accelerator next year. So we're going to deploy the sort of modalities we use to help startups do ideation and prepare their business plans and pitches and get sort of product market fit and all the buzzwords of a Sequoia deck. But we're going to do it for finance innovation, so new products and services. Nice. And you know, you're exactly right. I mean, it doesn't need to be a big institutional thing. I mean, we've got a little facility in India. I'll just try to tell this long story quickly, but basically the Indian rooftop solar market wasn't going, even though the Indian National Solar Mission has been a huge success. They put in dozens of gigawatts of solar in like 5 years and are on path to 100, I believe, but none in the roof, on the roof space. And we were trying to work out why. And it's the big obvious roofs in India are sort of like commercial buildings, you know, warehouses, distribution centers, things like that. They're very hard to underwrite because no one really knows who owns the building and what the like rights and title are on the buildings. And there's no Dun & Bradstreet, I guess, or that sort of facility. So we put $5 million to work just to start making loans to people to start deploying solar on roofs and to sort of price the market, you know, characterize what are the default rates, you know, work it out. Do they pay their electricity bill? Yeah, they do, it turns out, when it's cheaper than their bill from the grid, for sure. And so, you know, we've got a number, you can price the risk reward profile. And now the local capital is forming behind that sort of concessional stack we created, or that product, and it's going in. PACE is another great example. You know, Jerry Brown, the governor of California, put $10 million into a loan loss reserve to underwrite the counties that were first offering PACE in California, because Fannie and Freddie Mae said that it was going to be a problem with liens and the like in the mortgage industry. And this loan loss reserve was never drawn upon, but it basically catalyzed a multi-billion-dollar segment across counties and cities of California. So, you know, just a small little thing, a startup of a kind, maybe public sector or private sector, can be enormously impactful in advancing the cause.
Yeah, that's super cool. I didn't know that story about California and Jerry Brown, but I love that that's a thing. Of course, of course, in California. Well, I want to also ask you. I want to ask you about Australia. I actually have always looked to Australia to know what's going on in real estate, especially as it relates to sort of the proper valuation of real estate as a functional contribution to society, not a financial mechanism or asset. Like Australia does a pretty good job of saying, like, this building is going to be worth more because it does its job better. You value that kind of stuff in some cool market instruments that I've always appreciated. But you were telling me the other day about a building in Australia that's getting built that I just thought was a nice story of an inspiration that I was hoping you'd
Yeah.
share. But anything else about Australia that you think is useful, I'm always
I got to
game.
say, you wandering around the streets of Sydney as I've been doing for the last couple of months, it's looking good. You know, some gorgeous new builds and very interesting energy efficient solar passive design stuff going up as well. But yeah, this one is not yet built, but it's planned, and it's the tallest laminated timber construction in the world, I believe. And it's also going to be a sort of a center for technology and sustainability enterprises right in central Sydney, built by the Atlassian team. So the software company that has become the backbone of so much of the software engineering community are a Sydney SaaS business. And they're going to build this tower and demonstrate what can be done without steel, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, I just think these iconic kind of buildings can be really important in stretching our imaginations. Shenzhen comes to mind. But in Seattle, the Bullitt Center, if you haven't all paid attention to that one, a building which went up a decade ago, and for that decade, it's been producing more electricity than it consumes and more water than it consumes. I mean, it's a 6-story office building full of, people eating and peeing all the time, and it's working. It's wonderful. So I just think these demonstrations at scale can be really significant.
Yeah, I'm excited about that one. And I think it's a reminder that it's one of the things I actually like most about the entrepreneurship community is that when people like the founder of Atlassian, I'm sorry that I'm not going to remember his name, but
Mike Cannon-Brookes.
This guy, it's a powerful group of people because they've seen what happens when you do reach the capability to disrupt something.
Right.
Then suddenly, like, those are oftentimes the people who are behind these great building projects, these great disruptions in other indries,
Look, and Mike is, he's a bit of a hero. I know him a bit, and he's really throwing down. I mean, his latest bigger project than this is a multi-billion-dollar thing to run a cable from Northern Australia to Singapore with solar power in it, like a 10 gigawatt solar farm in the middle of Australia, plugged into Singapore, because Singapore, with its density, can't achieve its 100% renewable goal. And they will be happy to buy solar power all day long from Australia, which is just awesome. But it's like the world's biggest, farm, biggest battery, biggest undersea cable. It's one of those heroic undertakings. But we've got to throw down hard. This is the decade to do it, and everything's going to change. The disruption's coming, whether we like it or not. To your point about risk and real estate, it's happening and starting to get quantified. So we just need these solutions at scale soon.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of solutions at scale and throwing down hard, what advice do you have for the entrepreneurs in the community of real estate and sustainability that are trying to make changes? What can you give them to help them on their journey of changing the way that we do real estate?
Maybe look outside real estate. I think my observation for the real estate industry is it's a conservative business. It necessarily moves slowly and has decadal timelines in its mind, which is wonderful at one level. And we want long-term thinking in the world, but we don't have, there needs to be some antsiness introduced. And I think you could maybe get that by looking at, say, the EV world. I mean, look at the crash of oil this decade coming. The petrostates will dissipate because the EV thing. I mean, California just mandated 15 years from now, no internal combustion engine cars to be sold. France, the UK, they're all doing it. And that's happening sooner rather than later. Can you get inspired and activated by that to apply the same sort of thinking to the real estate industry, perhaps? As you know, we remake cities post-COVID. When we move back in to the urban form, what can we do that's different completely, upending it, even if we've got the same stock of buildings? So I join New Energy Nexus' Slack community just to get inspired by startups that are changing the world with cool tools. I mean, I thought I would tell you one of my favorite companies, SkyCool, this business that we backed in California a year or so ago. I can't even explain their technology. They have a module that looks like a solar panel, but it's actually got this material in it that pumps infrared from things. So it takes heat and it tries to create equilibrium with space. It has a passive capacity to just constantly try to create equilibrium with deep space. I know it sounds insane. And so, we've just run a little demo of their product on a data center and demonstrated that it works. It's saving like maybe 40% of the energy for cooling the data center because it's sucking the heat out of it and pushing it up into the world, like without any inputs. There's a water piece, but yeah, there's inspiring stuff like that you can get across if you go to New Energy Nexus, the Slack community, and just watch this space. Stuff like that would be my recommendation. Stay inspired, stay on the front foot. The ball's always in your court. You know that. You're real estate professionals. You're always hustling, but we've got to hustle for this now.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful, it's a wonderful rallying cry. Thank you. And thanks for being with us. That's all the time we have. It's been delightful to be with you.
Yeah. Thank you.